Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Garden Robinson, and I'm your host for today's Field to Fork webinar. These are brought to you by North Dakota State University Extension, and we extend a special welcome if you are joining us from a watch party. We are celebrating a milestone in 2025. This is actually the 10th year we've done this series, and we're really glad you continue to join us. We have reached thousands of people with information about growing, preparing, and preserving fruits and vegetables, along with best practices for food entrepreneurs. We have archived all of the more than 100 webinars from the previous years, and the link is always on our Field to Fork webinar page. The next slide shows the upcoming webinars. We hope you join us for these as well. The next slide shows the webinar controls. Because of our large number of participants, we invite you to post your questions and comments in the chat. So please ignore the Q&A box and click to open the chat. And to practice, as we've been doing, please type your city and state and your current outdoor temperature in Fahrenheit. While you're working on that, the next slide provides an acknowledgement. This program is sponsored in part with grant funding from the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. I will ask all of you to complete the short online survey that will be emailed right after today's webinar. As a special thank you, we will continue to provide prizes in the mail to the lucky winners of the random drawings. Be sure to include your complete address on the follow-up form, including your city, state, and zip code. And also scroll down to today's date. Again, welcome to today's webinar, and I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Assunta Susie Thompson is an associate professor in the Plant Sciences Department at North Dakota State University. She is the Johansen Thompson Endowed Professor in Potato Breeding. She conducts potato research in North Dakota and Minnesota. Susie is a native of Barnesville, Minnesota, where she grew up on a farm and was active in FFA and 4-H. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from NDSU in agronomy and horticulture, respectively, and she earned her PhD from the University of Idaho. Welcome, Susie.
Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to be presenting on tips and tricks for vegetable production. And as a way to introduce our topic, I thought I would share a few statistics that have come out in many publications recently. And since COVID, about 18.3 million new gardeners have been added to all the rest of us. About 42% of gardeners spent more time gardening during the COVID pandemic. 55% of American households engage in gardening. Today, about 29% of gardeners are millennials. And each of us, or each of our gardens, yields about $600 worth of produce in a given year, with 35% of U.S. households growing vegetables, fruits, or other food in their gardens. And a way to pass on a hobby that many of us enjoy is that children involved in growing vegetables are more willing to eat them at home or at school. So today is going to be a hodgepodge of topics, and I really kind of scanned or screened the surveys that you participants filled out after last year's Field to Fork webinar series and looked at topics that might be of interest to you and that might provide some tips with growing and producing, growing, storing, and maybe even eating or using the produce that we do grow. So I thought the first thing that we would do is kind of review our hardiness zones. And I haven't had a chance to look in the chat to see where everybody is today. But for those of you that might be unfamiliar with the hardiness zone maps, they break the US and are states and territories, including Puerto Rico, into different zones to help us with planting gardens, for example. And so North Dakota and Minnesota are predominantly in the 3s and 4 ranges. And as we can see here, they would be in the light pinky lavender colors. When we get down into the southern parts of Minnesota, then we are getting down into some areas of 5. So when we go to the stores to purchase seeds or to buy trees or other plants, we can observe what hardiness zone the produce or the product that we are looking to buy is hardy in. And certainly sometimes by using or putting a plant in a protected area, we are able to grow something that really isn't appropriate for our hardiness zone. But for the most part, we should be using that as a good guide. We also hear about average last frost-free dates. So the NOAA Weather Center puts out environmental information, and they have this lovely map which provides the average last frost date. So again, I'm sitting in Fargo, North Dakota. Our growing season is in that medium green color. Our last frost-free date is in that green color. And so we are provided with about 129 days of gardening or growing, ranging from May 15th until about September, maybe it's 15th as well, September 21. So May 14 to September 21 is 129 days. But you can see that in the higher elevations in the Rocky Mountains, for example, or even over in the Arrowhead region of Minnesota, they have a considerably shorter growing season. So the first topic that I'm going to talk about in terms of gardening and enhancing our gardening ability is going to be protected culture. And this is the use of technology to modify our natural environment for vegetable crops. And some protected cultures that we can use include greenhouses, high tunnels, low tunnels, the use of hot caps, bed covers, vertical farming, and even hydroponics and aquaponics. We can use protected culture to increase yields, to extend our growing season, to provide produce in urban areas where maybe there aren't big plots of land, and also to exclude pests. I'm going to start out with the most basic one, that being hot caps. These are small plastic or woven coverings for individual plants. You could, the top one actually is made out of material like wax paper that we would use in our kitchens. And that is also what is in the second picture where they have cut it open. These little hot caps are relatively inexpensive. They're not optimal for large production operations. So somebody that might be doing farmers market production, that you may need too many hot caps, particularly if you don't have enough labor. And we must either remove them or cut them open as the plant grows. The bottom are some little plastic pots that were tipped upside down. And I know that in my own garden, I save bleach jugs, for example, and I rinse them multiple times, wash them in the kitchen sink. I cut out the bottom before doing that. I retain the cap, and this allows me to put out a lot of my transplants, especially peppers or tomatoes, much earlier in May. And then as part of helping them, the plants inside acclimate, I remove that cap so that it doesn't get too hot on really hot days. And otherwise, I just kind of leave those on until the tip of the top part of the plant reaches up to where that cap is. And then I remove them, make sure that I've built the soil back up around them. You may, with some of the hot caps, you may have to come up with a means to water them, but I just put a trench, for example, around my little hot caps that I apply. The next type are called row covers, and these are lightweight fabric. Spun silk is a common one that is laid directly on top of the row. The edges of the fabric are buried after planting, and you can kind of see that in this picture. But many of the row covers that you can purchase even come with big staples that you can push into the soil or into turf if you are near or have walkways built with turf. These coverings protect our seedlings from flying insects. They also hold in heat. They can reduce evaporation of the moisture from the soil in these areas, but they must be removed when the crop begins pushing on the fabric. And they are available in varying thicknesses. There are some cautions and certainly some advantages. So advantages of using row covers include early growth and earlier maturity of our vegetable crops. Because we have earlier growth, we usually wind up with higher yields. The covers provide some protection from both insects and the wind. And certainly here on the prairie, we have a lot of wind. And even the light ones provide some frost protection. There are some disadvantages, and these include high temperature buildup, which can result in heat stress, and some of the physiological problems that you might notice with your row coverings if you leave them on too long might be bolting of some sensitive crops like lettuce or others, and aborting of buds and flowers on things like peppers or on cucurbits like our squashes or our melons. Low tunnels are a little bit different. These are short, transparent tunnels, as you can see in the photograph. Usually they're less than 4 feet tall, and I think the ones that I use in my vegetable crop production class are probably 1.5 to 2 feet tall at most. And some of them allow you to open and close the sides, like in this picture. Others are more solid, and you may need to cut them open or lift them off on very hot days. They are not suitable for tall crops. They do exclude pollinators. Certainly if you're opening them on some days and then closing them down, pollinators may get trapped in there, and that can be an advantage if you are starting to have flowering of some of your vegetables that need pollination. And of course, like any of these crop protection systems, it does lead to a level of added management. In our picture here, they undoubtedly also have a drip irrigation system underneath these beds that they have built, and they have applied plastic mulch over the top to help with weeding and again to increase that temperature, because black plastic under clear plastic will build up heat quite rapidly. And then a much larger scale would be high tunnels, and these are an intermediate step between temporary structures like our low tunnels and more permanent structures like greenhouses. Usually they consist of a double layer of plastic film. They allow for early warm season vegetable production. Some like the bottom one, they are able to lift up the sides in order to harden off their crops, and they also can have a small heating system in there to help maintain the heat if the temperatures drop uncharacteristically lower than would be normal. And so this larger size allows for vertically growing plants such as tomatoes. There are some management considerations really with all of the methods, and these would be that rainfall is excluded, so irrigation may be necessary. Nutrient inputs can be either conventional or organic. All are suitable with our protected culture. And we should be monitoring for insect pests as well as diseases. Certainly when we have enclosures, we may see, and if we have a lot of humidity, we may see an increase in botrytis or gray mold. We may see a more rapid infestation of insects if we're not, if insect pest gets into our system because we have a side up, for example. and we don't have beneficials there to be controlling it. And oftentimes, if we're using low tunnels or things like hot caps, we're not applying any type of insecticide or fungicide or anything like that to our production area. And of course, we need to remember that under things like high tunnels, that crop rotation is really important. But throughout our garden, whether we're using any type of protective growth or not, crop rotation is very important. Want to briefly talk about solarization, and of course this allows for sterilization of our soils. And again, it's important if we are using things like high tunnels or if we have a more permanent structure like a greenhouse. And our soil diseases can be managed with fumigants if we're outside, but this is dangerous and it's really impractical in gardens. So there are opportunities to use steam sterilization like you see in the top picture, as well as the bottom picture. But these methods are very expensive and again require a lot of inputs. But solarization is very simple, and this just utilizes clear plastic that is placed over our area that we want to treat. And ideally, it will raise the soil temperature to 110 degrees Fahrenheit or above. Next, I want to talk a little bit about mulches. And for those of us that don't use mulches or haven't used them in the past, mulches allow us to modify our soil surfaces. They enhance our crop growth, particularly if we use plastics, but also when we use things like wood chips. And our materials can be organic or they can be plastic. And there are several benefits. I guess I could list a couple more organic options that could include straw. Personally, I like to put straw underneath my tomato plants. It helps keep the fruits, if any of the branches get particularly heavy, helps keep the fruits off of the soil, and also can prevent splash of things like early blight spores from splashing from the soil during rain or overhead irrigation. And also some people will use grass. My dad likes to put grass on my garden, and that is not my favorite type of organic mulch, but at the same time, it does help with fighting back some weeds and keeping some plants raised up off the soil surface. The benefits of mulches include reducing evaporation, warming of the soil, particularly if we're using things like black plastic or clear plastic. They help warm up the soil. They improve weed control. And there is nutsedges. They're one weed that will grow through plastic. And it doesn't matter what color, if it's clear, if it is white, red, black. Nutsedge is one that will grow through despite our best efforts. And then, of course, it does provide minimal, but some protection from frost, particularly when the plants are small or if you are growing a root crop, for example. Companion planting is another area that there were a lot of comments and people were asking about companion planting. And I have to say that I have been interested in this since I was a 4-H'er and probably, 7 or 8 years old and just starting out gardening with my grandmas and my mom and dad. And companion planting has a lot of history in terms of folklore, but until recently, and really, I guess I probably haven't seen any scientific papers be published on companion planting until maybe around 2020, maybe a few in that 2013 to 2015 range, but a lot of us have heard about companion planting more because of folklore. And companion planting is growing specific plants together to improve growth, reduce pests, and to save space. One of the big reasons for doing it is for insect management. And here I have a picture of elephant garlic up in the top, and I have some tomatillas down in the bottom. But insect management can come because of the smell. And so when we look at a table here in another slide or two, we're going to see that a lot of times herbs make great companions with other regular vegetables. They can, companion plants can be great in attracting predators and parasitoids, and they can also be visually distracting. And while my picture on the bottom is very small and it's a picture of tomatillas, there are some peppers hiding in there. I can't say that I planted them there on purpose, but it did seem to help keep pests away because of the distraction and the thickness of having all of that ground cover in my garden. Here's a modified companion planting guide. I couldn't, because of the size of our fonts and everything, I couldn't put all of the vegetables, but I think a lot of us hear about basil and tomatoes. So if we're growing basil, we should plant basil near asparagus, tomatoes, and peppers, and basil can be planted near any vegetable. If we look at our bush beans, nasturtiums, beets, and marigolds make good companions, whereas onions and garlic make poor companions. Broccoli, we should be considering some of our herbs like chamomile, dill, and mint, but garlic is also a good one. And again, all of these have odors that keep the cabbage loopers and cabbage moths at bay from our broccoli and other of the Brassicaceae family. Some crops that we should avoid planting near broccoli would be dill, pole beans, and the brassicas. And lastly, I guess I'll mention corn because I think a lot of us have heard about the three sisters. And so corn, beans, and squash were all planted together. And we see that those are good choices, but we should avoid planting celery or tomatoes near corn. But the Native Americans planted the three sisters in this area and found that the beans supplied nutrients for the corn and the squash. The corn supplied structure for the squash to climb on, and the three sisters worked well together. In the vegetable production class that I teach, I talk a lot about classification. And again, I thought that this could be an interesting topic to help gardeners consider what or how to manage their vegetable crops. Because oftentimes if we are planting vegetables of similar classification, they perform better using similar growing techniques. And one thing I keep reminding my own students is the classification also gives us some hints about how to store our produce after we've harvested it. So there are many different types of classification, including botanical description. So that's our family, our genus, our species. We can classify plants and vegetables using our edible plant part. We can classify them based on temperature requirements or that hardiness, like I talked about the hardiness zones. We can classify them by their life cycle. Are they annuals or perennials? And there are many other types of classification systems that I could probably spend a whole day talking about, or a whole session just talking about classification systems. But we'll first of all review vegetable families. So some common vegetable families include the Apiaceae or the carrot family. Carrot, celery, and parsley are in that family. The Asteraceae or sunflower family includes vegetables like chicory, endive, and our lettuces. And I think we all think about sunflowers themselves, but this family is very diverse in terms of the plants that are contained within it. Our Brassicaceae is one of the largest and is the mustard family. And we have a lot of vegetables, including broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, the Chinese cabbages, collards, kale, kohlrabi, rutabagas, and turnips belong to that family. Our goosefoot family, or Chenopodiaceae, includes beets, chard, and spinach. The Cucurbitaceae, and I believe Tom Kalb gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago on this, includes our cantaloupes, pumpkins, watermelons. Our pulse family includes beans, peas, and peanuts. The Liliaceae, again, is very diverse and includes asparagus, chives, garlics, onion, and leeks. Our grass family has sweet corn, of course, and our Solanaceae or nightshade family includes everything from tobacco and petunias to eggplants, peppers, potato, and tomato. For edible plant parts, when we think about roots, we think about beets and turnips. Bulbs include onions and garlic. Some people call it well, I guess I would call it a stem of asparagus as well. I was thinking about celery, which I have down lower, but both celery and rhubarb, we eat the petiole. For flowers, a common one that we eat, it would be cauliflower, and immature flowers, of course, would be broccoli. Tubers, potato is the one that comes to mind. Our immature fruits includes things like squash. Mature fruits includes tomato, and here I would actually include pumpkin because the rind of our pumpkins have gotten to be hard. And so maybe an immature, or another good immature fruit would be more specifically the summer squash. For leaves, we eat leaves of lettuce and cabbages. And of course, for seeds, we eat peas and beans. If we're classifying by temperature, our cool season crops are those that grow best between 50 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and we can divide them into hardy and half hardy. The hardier ones being the ones that grow best at the colder temperatures and aren't harmed by frost. And our warm season crops are those that grow best from 65 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, oftentimes not even germinating until we reach that 65-degree temperature. And these can be classified as tender or very tender. Classification based on life cycle includes our annuals, so broccoli, cauliflower, lettuces, peas, potatoes, pumpkins, and radishes. Our biennials need 2 seasons before they will produce a flower stalk and seeds. And these include beets, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, carrots, onions, parsnips, and turnips. And perennial vegetables include asparagus, chives, eggplants, not in northern production areas, but in the areas where chives are, or eggplants are native, they actually are considered to be perennials. Garlic is a perennial. Peppers, similar to eggplants, in the area where they are native, they grow as perennials oftentimes. And of course, a common one here in the northern part of the US is rhubarb or pie plant. Because of the discussion on classification, I thought maybe sharing a little bit of information about centers of origin would be useful. So our ancestors gathered plants in the wild, and over the course of time, they domesticated them. They identified ones that would grow best if they were cultivating them, and they certainly, as they were domesticating them, attempted to select for high yield, maybe pretty colors, maybe good flavor, a lot of different traits that we now can take advantage of. And of course, the time for domestication really depended upon the species. Some of us maybe don't realize this, but there are no major vegetable crops that originated in the United States. And so really only the only vegetables that originated in the US are Jerusalem artichokes, tepary beans, and also sunflowers. We have some crops that have centers of origin. For example, I'm going to pick on potatoes since I'm the potato breeder, but we really consider the centers of origin of potato to be Peru and then also Chile in both countries in South America. But we do have some wild potato species that grow and can be found in the Four Corners region of the US. So they, did migrate and find their way. And here is a map So on this map, you can see Jerusalem artichoke and tepary beans being indicated in the southwestern part of the United States. If we look at South America, we see centers of origin for pepper, squashes, sweet potato, and pumpkins, as well as tomato, corn, lima beans, and potato. If we go over into the Middle Eastern countries, we can see that this is where lettuce, celery, radishes, spinach, and asparagus, along with pea and beet, were originated. For our European input, we got cabbages, carrots, turnips, and parsnips. Africa is home to artichokes, yams, as well as okra. New Zealand, of course, provides New Zealand spinach. And then in parts of Eurasia, we have horseradish, endive, cress, onions, eggplants, and cucumbers, as well as celery and other types of cabbage. So those are centers of origin for some vegetables. But oftentimes now that you know where the center of origin is for many of these, you might see similarities in how you want to grow peppers and tomatoes, for example, and even potato, although it prefers cooler temperatures. We have similar growing conditions for string beans and lima beans because they originated in an area that was close to the other. And then I thought I would put in a little plug for many of my coworkers. There were a lot of questions about new cultivars, and I thought maybe you guys needed a list of some excellent resources. And these would include Dr. Esther McGinnis, Dr. Tom Kalb. They're both extension horticulturalists with North Dakota State University, along with Don Kinsler. We have many county extension offices, one in every county in North Dakota. We have many in Minnesota, and I know some of you participants today are from other states, but your county extension offices can provide good lists and oftentimes conduct trials annually to try out new varieties of different vegetables. And then, of course, there's publications. And nowadays, a lot of our gardening catalogs are both online as well as hard print copies, but oftentimes their online offerings include a lot of educational information about new varieties. Aging gardeners was another area where there were a lot of where seemed to be a lot of questions or interest. And I'm just going to put in a shameless plug here. We have a very beautiful display garden at NDSU. And what we are seeing in these photos is actually our historic daylily collection that is also a part of that display garden. But I know that there's a lot of interest, as many of us are aging, about how we can still participate in gardening activities. Well, one of the easiest ways is raised beds. And I probably could have done a whole presentation again on this topic and had a slide for a myriad of ways to install or develop raised beds. It can be as simple as having a cart that is raised and filling it with soil to these more permanent structures like in the two pictures here. But again, by having it be raised, there's less need for anybody to be kneeling on the ground in order to plant or pick the produce or weed or even scouting for pests. And one of the reasons why I included the picture on the right was I really like this one because the gardener could sit on that ledge and work their way around their raised bed, but it still was a good size and could produce a lot of different species of vegetables, including mixing in with some flowers like marigolds or whatever. And then, of course, there's container gardening. And the picture on the left-hand side is probably a more typical container garden where you might have a species or two. Here, this gardener has tomatoes and lettuce together. Can't remember if that was a good choice based on our companion planting. But I know in my case, I have many years used a half barrel. And because our lettuces and chard and beets, carrots all grow well with cooler temperatures, I would plant a half a barrel. I would fill it with my soil mixture and then plant half to uh, Swiss chard, for example, and the other half to a lettuce. And then when I finished harvesting those crops, a few weeks later, I just changed over and bought bedding plants and put bedding plants into my barrels. But that way I was able to get homegrown produce a lot earlier. And then the picture on the right, I luckily found, I think it possibly came from Pinterest, originally, but this is a really unique way of providing vertical container growing. And they used or converted a shoe bag, a hanging shoe bag, into a way to grow plants. So many of the plants that are in their planting are herbs, but what a fun way to be able to extend the your ability to garden if you're not able to bend over for long periods of time or kind of creep around your garden. Instead, you can stand and do it. And this one is very large, since it has 5 or 6 different um, sections, but even a small one could be very fun. Oopsie. Then I wanted to mention hydroponics, and I own one of those arrow gardens, and this is a picture of it. I had already started harvesting the cilantro leaves, and one I had already completely eaten. And then on the right-hand side, I was growing lettuce, and I do this during the winter. There are many simple options, but an arrow garden is just one brand. You can grow a myriad of vegetables, but it's particularly amenable for herbs and cooking there. But you could also use it to start transplants, such as tomatoes, and get them started and then move them out to your garden. I have seen people produce cherry tomatoes in their arrow gardens, but I have not done that yet. And the thing that I really enjoy about it, and other folks that might be aging, is that it provides you with off-season gardening opportunities. And again, you can do it right on your kitchen counter, or anywhere. It could be in your office at work. So I think that that's a great option and way to extend your ability to keep gardening. I wanted to bring up germination testing, and I should at the same time be remembering to tell people or remind people that a lot of families like to be gardening. So doing the container gardening or having a raised bed and having your kids or grandkids out there helping you with planting, or maybe they need to be the ones. It is a bit of a chore if you have raised beds to be able to do tillage in those spaces, for example. Maybe you enlist the help of your tweens and teens to help you with that. When it's the off season, say January, and you're starting to get seed catalogs and you're starting to dream about what you want to grow, whether it be in your arrow garden, in your container garden in the spring, or out in a big garden. Maybe if you're like me, you don't use up all your seed every year. One of the activities that you could do, either on your own or again in collaboration with your grandkiddos, might, or your kids, might be creating rag dolls. And this is where we take paper towel, we dampen it, we lay it out flat, and then across one side, we place our old seed. We roll it back up, then we put it into a little container. This is just a pot that doesn't have holes in the bottom. And the typical number I use is 10 seeds. And I wait for the amount of time that it should take for the seed to germinate. And then I open it up, unroll it, and I count how many of the seeds germinated. Many of our seeds have, good germination, good life for 3 to 5 years. But if I think about vegetable seed like parsnips, that's one that I buy new every single year. But if you have pumpkin seed or corn or peas or beans, these are easy to test, and many of them you'll be able to use that second or third year from the original purchase. In my class, we also do it using Petri plates, but I didn't find any fun pictures this morning in my search to be able to show you what the germinating seeds look like. And then lastly, in terms of gardening funds, since we were talking about how can we get our kids to join us or our grandkids, there are a number of really excellent books that you can purchase, whether it's through Amazon or at Barnes and Noble or other bookstores. And a couple of the one We Are the Gardeners, that's a new one by Joanna Gaines. Roots, Shoots, Buckets, and Boots is an older book that I've maybe had for 20 years, but it offers some really fun and exciting activities. That particular book talks about growing a pizza garden with your kiddos, or this could even be at an assisted living home where maybe the residents decide that they want to grow a pizza garden. You can grow a snack and sip garden. That would include some cherry tomatoes and things that you could easily pick and snack on right out of the garden. With the Farm Anatomy Activities for Kids book, this has some fun activities, including eggshell gardening. And I know eggs, the price is terrible right now, but oftentimes during the spring, we are busy blowing eggs and getting ready for Easter. And so we would have eggshells, and that would be a fun time to start a project with kids or grandkids. We've all heard of making salad in a jar. As one activity in the Farm Anatomy book, you can make compost in a jar and learn about how to make that. And then also regenerating food from scraps. So things like an asparagus pit, not asparagus, I'm sorry, an avocado pit, or even when we cut off the tops of carrots, they will grow a plant. Not necessarily a carrot, but they'll grow the plant. And that's a great way to have kids learn about how to identify some of the vegetables that they might be growing. Well, I'm sure that I've missed a few things, and hopefully people don't mind that this was a hodgepodge of topics. Maybe there will be enough interest that in the next couple of years we'll have to put individual sessions together about some of them, but I wanted to inspire some of you to look into companion gardening if that's an area that you're curious about, or some of us that are trying to garden across generations with our family members or roommates or whatever. I wanted to kind of give you a few tips that can help you get started on your gardening journey. With that, if there's questions.
You have a few questions. Thank you so much. That was a very nice talk. When you were talking about row covers, a couple questions came in. Could I use milk jugs as hot caps?
Absolutely. And I should have brought up milk jugs. I brought up bleach containers, but yes, plastic milk jugs. And when I was a kid, we used to get milk in cardboard, half gallons. And so we oftentimes use those as hot caps. We just, cut the bottom out, rinse them and use them as hot caps. Excellent choice.
Another question. What about 5-gallon pails?
I think that you could use 5-gallon pails. Things like our milk jugs and our bleach containers, they're a little bit more translucent than some of the 5-gallon pails. So I think I might check that. But certainly for some taller vegetables, they could work. Yep. And I didn't mention, but even in my past gardening, I have used old tires, particularly around cucurbits. If I started cucurbits, that size was just a nice size, and I left them on the whole season. it would help kind of trap some water early in the season in there. But because of the black, that really added, and there certainly was no cover over it, but it really developed a little microclimate. And I know that you also can purchase things called walls of water that kind of add the same sort of environmental conditions. You put water in little cells around this. They're like little plastic tubes around this, and they're quite inexpensive and will last at least one growing season, maybe more. But a lot of people use those for tomato production because the water heats up during the day and provides some protection from cool temperatures or a light frost at night.
Very good. We all want to get outside and garden right now, but it's still
Exactly.
cold and foggy.
That's why I was talking about that arrow garden. I brought it to my office because I wanted to show my students, and I'm tempted to set it up because it
Yes.
would be fun to have some lettuce, fresh lettuce right now.
We have another question for you. It's about the clear plastic in place for solarization. How long should you keep it in place?
Ideally, and excuse me, I have to swallow for a second there. The plastic would be kept in place for a number of days, but ideally you possibly should be using a little soil testing probe thermometer to be sure that it is getting to that 110-degree range, because it needs to be that warm in order to kill pathogens, like spores of pathogens or mycelium, whatever happens to be out there. But if it gets that hot or hotter, we also start seeing it kill nematodes, weed seeds, and other things that we don't want there.
Okay, we have the question of the day. What is the best way to keep squirrels away from my tomatoes? I had to stop planting them because the squirrels would steal my entire crop.
Oh, wow. Usually the questions that I hear are about deer. And where I live, I was in a neighborhood where our city didn't plant trees right away, and so a lot of our trees are small. But just the last 2 years, I finally started to see the very rare squirrel. So I guess I'll have this same sort of thing happening. But I don't really know what to do. You can go to some of the big box stores or garden centers, and there will be products that you can put out that are supposed to deter cats and dogs and other wildlife. Squirrels obviously are great climbers, so fences are not going to probably help you at all. I don't know. I guess some people put out those plastic owls to kind of make, kind of like a scarecrow, but it's a plastic owl. I don't know if they're successful, but those are some of the things I would try. I know that there are other people that put out um like a pretty clear milk jug, but they're filled with water, and they put those on the corners of their garden. And I'm not sure which pest that is supposed to be driving away, if it's rabbits or squirrels, but that might be um worth a investigation as well.
There's a research project for you.
Well, a lot of schools, they have science fairs. Maybe a student that's interested in gardening could do some of these things.
Yeah. Someone just popped in about the squirrels again. I pick tomatoes at the breaker stage before squirrels get to them. So,
Yep. So they're picking the tomatoes when they are fairly immature. They're maybe just starting to get that light pinky orange color. Um, and then they are ripening them on their counter or what in their on their windowsills.
and here's a generous gardener, another squirrel idea. I'm going to pop it into my document. I have put some damaged tomatoes on the fence, and then they leave alone the tomato plants. So there you go. Give them a little
That's a
something.
great idea. Yeah.
Okay, the next question, and you have a few more. Although not grown by home gardeners, would wild rice and cranberries be considered as originating in the US?
They both originated in the US, if I recall, but they're not considered vegetables. Cranberries are considered a fruit, and wild rice is considered a grain. But I love both.
Here's another tip from someone. We plant onions around our raised garden and it keeps the deer away as we live in a timber area. The scent interferes with their smell. So try that out. So
Yeah.
they don't like the onions, I guess. Here's another piece. Everyone loves tomatoes, and that's good because they're really good for you. I have cherry tomatoes in my arrow garden right now. Sweet 100 is a perfect variety for it. You just have to brush the blossoms with a Q-tip or small paintbrush to pollinate, but they work great. So,
That's
should,
an excellent one.
yep. Couple more. Tilling and raised beds often don't agree. I use square foot gardening techniques with my raised beds, which minimizes weeding. I rarely till my raised beds, but I do pay close attention to crop rotation. So
Again,
not a
very good,
mm,
good
just
tip.
just a tip. Well, we've got the gardening experts out here on this call. So the last one I'm seeing, and then I'll look back in the chat. Do you have resources to suggest for companion planting?
I know that on my slide for companion planting, I have the link to where, one place that I went, but really, if you just go online and do a Google search, a myriad of materials do come up. But otherwise, let me see. I guess one of the papers that I found came, the Washington State University Extension, they actually have an extension publication about companion gardening. So WSU out of Pullman, Washington, is one reference. University of Minnesota also has a little, kind of and this one, it isn't available as a publication on its own, but if you go to the University of Minnesota Extension website, they have a companion planting in home gardens publication. And
if
then
you're, go ahead.
there was another one, I guess, that I spotted when I was looking. It was called Garden Pals, and that was online.
So here's a little tip about searching. If you want to find research-based information, if you Google or search online for search cooperative extension, it'll take you to a customized search that will just look at about 700 or more extension sites.
Wow.
So it's a specialized search within Google. And the last question I'm seeing here is, what material do you fill the raised bed with?
Okay, so the common material that a lot of people will use would be your peat moss based potting mixes. Some people will use, soil that they either have purchased at a gardening center or that is bagged, or maybe can be delivered bulk, depending upon your town and your gardening centers. But oftentimes people like to use something that is a little bit lighter just because it is difficult to till. And I didn't really mean that, if I said the word till while I was talking about it, I didn't really mean that we would be using a tiller in our raised beds. Although nowadays they do make some light ones that are, just a few pounds, but they only, their depth of tillage is just, in that 4-inch range, maybe 8 if you're really super lucky. But I meant that we maybe need to use a fork, for example, or something else to loosen up the soil and kind of mix it and allow us to mix in things like organic materials, whether it be compost or manures. Certainly, chicken manure, you can get at some of the gardening centers, or there's other, well-aged manures. You don't want to use fresh manure. And I always caution people, you don't want your neighbor's dogs using your yard as a litter box, because that is not safe. Then your vegetables in your garden are not safe for consumption. So, but when we are using chicken manure, cattle, things like that that are well aged, they're perfectly safe. They don't eat the same types of foods that we humans eat, and don't have the same microorganisms in their gut that we have.
I just popped in a suggestion. Someone just popped in called Plant Partners by Jessica Walliser. So that might be a book you want to check out and see if that's something you want to have in your own gardening library. I am not seeing any more questions for you, Susie. I see that we have already sent out the online survey. So please go ahead and take that survey. It's time for me to write my grant report. So I always like to have a lot of survey responses. And here is the extension search link, by the way. So I just popped that into the chat, thanks to my intern. But we will be continuing about another 5 of these webinars. We'll take a break 1 week when there's an extension conference going on, but I hope you continue to join us. And thanks so much, Susie. This was great information. I love to learn more and more and more about gardening, and I can't wait to get out and get my hands dirty. So thanks everybody for being here. Join us again. Please take the survey, and hopefully we'll see most of you next week.
Thanks, everyone.